Did Qatar infiltrate the Israeli government in the middle of a war? As Prime Minister Netanyahu flies to Mar-a-Lago to meet President Trump officially to talk about Iran and Gaza back home, a storm is erupting. And to add fuel to the fire, Netanyahu's party pushes a controversial bill for a full state inquiry into the October 7th massacre. Stay tuned for Jerusalem Minute. Welcome back to Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV. My name is Josh Haston, correspondent for JNS. I am in Jerusalem at the JNS Media Hub. My colleague Alex Trayman, CEO of JNS, he is down in southern Florida. Of course, Prime Minister Netanyahu traveling today to Florida to meet with President Donald Trump. Alex, you're on the scene there. What can you tell us?
Well, this will be the sixth meeting between Prime Minister Netanyahu and Donald Trump since the president returned to office. That is by far the most of any world leader, and certainly way more meetings than Netanyahu had with Joe Biden or other presidents for that matter, just in such a short period of time. The president is only in office now for not even a year, and already there's been six meetings. And I think that that is an indication in and of itself of the nature of the relationship, just how important a strategic partner both Prime Minister Netanyahu perceives Donald Trump to be, and how important America is for the state of Israel, and how also important the United States views Israel as an important ally, and particularly as Israel continues to wind down this war on so many different fronts.
Alex, according to reports, the two will be discussing Gaza, Iran, and from what I read over the weekend, there's a campaign which is being launched by evangelical Christians, trying to encourage President Trump towards sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. What do we know about the topics for the meeting?
Well, I don't think that sovereignty is really going to be on the agenda right now. The president's been pretty adamant in recent months that he doesn't see the advancement of sovereignty in Judea and Samaria as being on the table. And I think that's in part because the president does want to reach some kind of a normalization agreement with Saudi Arabia. And the Saudis have been stating that a formal annexation or formal application of sovereignty could stand in the way of the Saudis being able to move ahead with the normalization. But you do see all throughout Judea and Samaria that the state of Israel and the government is normalizing a lot of so-called settlements, these Jewish communities that maybe had illegal status. They're being normalized, they're being legalized, and Israel is advancing building plans in many of these communities. So while you don't have a formal annexation or formal application of sovereignty, you do see facts on the ground changing, with the United States giving a green light to Israel to expand its presence and formalize its presence in Judea and Samaria. But I don't think that that's really what they're going to be talking about. I think that the two topics that are really first and foremost on the agenda are Iran and Gaza. We'll take them one at a time. So if you look at Iran, there's been reports, and Barak Ravid, who I think has gotten many, many reports wrong over the last several years and is always being used as a launch pad for those quote unquote senior officials who are unnamed to badmouth the prime minister and to try to undermine the U.S. and Israel strategic relationship, to undermine the relationship between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. Those reports were stating that Israel was seeking a green light for new attacks against Iran. And I don't know if there's going to be any green light for attacks. I'm not sure that Israel actually wants to attack. However, what is clear is that Iran is rebuilding its ballistic missile capacity. They're in a race to build as many ballistic missiles as they can. In addition to building the ballistic missiles, they're also trying to rebuild their capacity to launch those missiles. The launch pads are the bottleneck in the equation for the Iranians. Easier to produce missiles, more difficult to produce the launchers. And what we saw during the war, the 12-day war in June, was that Israel probably took out about 50% of Iran's launchers. They're on a race to reproduce and reproduce the ability to launch. On the other side of it, Israel is on a race to reproduce the interceptors, the Arrow, the THAAD system, that's the U.S. system, the ability to intercept ballistic missiles. So you have this sort of arms race that's already taking place, along with reports that Iran might be trying to rebuild their nuclear capacity. So this is something that I think the prime minister is going to be addressing first and foremost. And I think that there is an alignment between the president and the prime minister on the need to make sure that Iran does not become a nuclear power and certainly does not have the ability to threaten Israel with ballistic missiles. So that's Iran.
Alex, that's the Iranian front. Let's talk about Gaza right now. Will we be heading towards phase 2 of the ceasefire agreement? What are you hearing?
Well, certainly the president wants to see the ceasefire that he negotiated 3 months ago go into phase 2. Now, phase 1 was an Israeli withdrawal. Right now, Israel sits on this yellow line and controls about 53% of the Gaza Strip. And Hamas, what they were supposed to do in the phase 1 was to release all the living hostages, which they did. There are no living hostages in the Gaza Strip. And as of the time of this podcast, there is one remaining body of a dead hostage. So all of the bodies, except for the body of Ron Gvili, have been returned. All the living hostages returned. Israel pulled back to about half of the Gaza Strip control. And now the president would really like to see phase 2. And what does phase 2 include? This includes the establishment of the Board of Peace that the president talked about. The president said that he would be the chairman of the Board of Peace. There were reports that Italy, Great Britain, Germany, Turkey, Gaza, Qatar could be have representatives sitting on this Board of Peace. The Board of Peace would be the ones to sort of oversee the difficult negotiations and challenges between Israel, between Hamas and the United States in the rebuilding effort. Now, more important than this Board of Peace is what is being referred to as the ISF, the International Stabilization Force. Right now, we've heard that perhaps Egyptian troops could be part of that ISF, that Jordanian troops could be part of it. There was some talk maybe that there would be Pakistani troops. The country that wants to send troops into the International Stabilization Force is Turkey. And Turkey and President Erdogan of Turkey and President Trump, seem to have a close relationship, or so said Tom Barrack, who's America's ambassador to Turkey. Israel doesn't want Turkey to have a role in Gaza because Israel views Turkey as being the next generation of the Muslim Brotherhood. And what we saw is that by signing the agreement, entering into phase 1, Qatar, the Turks, they did that and they released the hostages in order to protect Hamas. Phase 2 of the agreement calls for the disarming of Hamas and the demilitarization of the Gaza Strip. So Turkey and Gaza, they don't want to see that. But what do all the players want to see? And so President Trump, who's taking his cues from his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and from his special envoy, Steve Witkoff, the two of them have very, very strong business dealings with the Qataris. They want to see skyscrapers built in the Gaza Strip. They want to see some kind of upward mobility. They want to see some kind of Riviera, as we've talked about, being built in the Gaza Strip. And, I think that there is a very close working relationship between Netanyahu and Trump. But, I had one senior Israeli official tell me just last night that they perceive that could be a standoff situation whereby, the Trump administration, led by Kushner, led by Witkoff, they want to see a further Israeli withdrawal. They want to see the conditions met for some kind of rebuilding effort to take place. But at the same time, question about what will be the role of Hamas. And we're starting to hear more and more rumblings that members of the administration think that, well, maybe Hamas can stay in some form of another, and then maybe they could even maintain some degree of weapons. These are things that for Netanyahu, he's going to have to navigate carefully. For Netanyahu, he promised the Israeli electorate total victory. He promised that Hamas would no longer exist as a military power or a governing power in the Gaza Strip. So there's certainly a broad difference of opinion on the future of Hamas in Gaza and whether Israel at some point might get a green light to go in and to do the dirty work that nobody else is willing to do, which is to disarm Hezbollah, disarm Hamas, and to demilitarize the Gaza Strip.
Alex, just one other point here. You mentioned Witkoff and Kushner. There was an article framed over the weekend in which it indicated that you had on one side, you had the opinions of Kushner, of Witkoff, and on the other side, you had Marco Rubio and some of his opinions, which I would argue are perhaps even stronger when it comes to Israel and insisting that Hamas be completely disarmed before moving forward, whereas under the opinions of Kushner and Witkoff, perhaps there's a little bit of wiggle room. Are you getting a sense that there are two camps there? What's your opinion on what's going on there?
Oh, absolutely. I think that if Israel had to choose, who was going to be running the policy with regard to Gaza moving forward, they would hope that that was Marco Rubio. And the prime minister is scheduled to meet Marco Rubio tomorrow at, I think, 1 or 2 p.m., even before he meets with the president. Prime minister making sure to have a very close working meeting with Rubio. It's not clear yet if there will be a meeting with Kushner or with Witkoff, or whether Kushner and Witkoff and maybe Rubio also will be inside those meetings together with the president, but a separate meeting taking place ahead of time with Rubio. Rubio, I think he understands it. You've heard statements from him. We've reported about that on this program. He understands the threat of Islamic radicalism, Islamic extremism. He understands the threat of Hamas. And I think that the real difference of opinion between these two camps, the Kushner-Witkoff camp and the Rubio camp, is the role of Qatar. With Kushner and Witkoff, seeming to communicate over and over again that the Qataris are America's friends, they are America's allies. We saw President Trump issue an executive order giving Qatar, some advanced status as a defense partner of the United States, and Israel does not view Qatar as an ally in any way, shape, or form. They view Qatar as the ones that are housing the Hamas leadership, the ones that were negotiating on behalf of Hamas during the war and during the negotiations. And even Israel believes that Qatar is undermining American interests with the investments into American universities and American media and the like, with the views that even people like Tucker Carlson are getting funded by Qatar. And that's doing significant damage to the relationship between Israel and the evangelical Christians. As such, I know that the prime minister has a special event scheduled on Wednesday morning where he's meeting with evangelical leaders, something that he typically likes to do when he gets to the United States.
Alex, looking forward to your reporting on jns.org all week from South Florida. At the same time, a lot of other news to get to. A bill advanced in the Knesset this week, with lawmakers voting in favor of a preliminary reading to establish a politically appointed probe into the October 7, 2023 failures instead of a state commission of inquiry. The bill would create a new type of commission whose members would be picked by the Knesset instead of the Supreme Court. And also something very interesting here, Prime Minister Netanyahu said that the commission must also examine, in addition to the failures of October 7th, must examine the 1993 Oslo Accords, the 2005 so-called disengagement from Gaza, along with the protest movement's current campaign against the government, specifically launched several years ago on the focusing at that time on the judicial overhaul agenda. So let's focus on the significance of the fact that this commission would be set up by the state and not the Supreme Court, and also the additions, which I think are very important, which Netanyahu added on here.
Yeah, I think it was very important that the prime minister laid that out, the reasons why he wants this commission to be established by the parliament, right? October 7th did not happen in a vacuum. The attack of Hamas into the Israeli communities of the South on October 7th didn't start on October 6th. They didn't start on October 1st. It didn't even start a year before. The disengagement from the Gaza Strip was the catalyst that allowed for Hamas to take over Gaza just 2 years after that disengagement took place, and forbid Israel from going in and doing what we call in Israel, mowing the grass. They weren't able to do that, and they just allowed Hamas to build up the terror network, to build up their missile arsenal without any preemptive action on Israel's part. And so I think that disengagement has to be viewed as one, at least investigated as one of the possible causes. And the disengagement also didn't happen in a vacuum. The disengagement happened as part of the Oslo Accords, as part of the two-state process. The disengagement from Gaza was the pilot project for Palestinian statehood. So you have to ask yourself the question, like, why would Israel give up land to its enemies in the hopes of making peace when the enemies do not swear for peace? They're swearing to curse and to destroy the state of Israel. Hamas continues to have the destruction of the state of Israel in its charter. And I think that hereby lies the difference between the prime minister's approach and the traditional approach would be to have the court establish this commission of inquiry. Remember, the court supports the Oslo Accords over and over again with its policies, and any government policy that seeks to undo the Oslo Accords, the court negates. Okay, the court supported Ariel Sharon when he wanted to disengage from the Gaza Strip, when Sharon wanted to bypass the own mechanisms, the mechanisms that he himself put into place ahead of that disengagement, and then violated those mechanisms. The Supreme Court protected him so that he would be able to affect the disengagement. So you have to look at the disengagement. You have to look at the Oslo Accords, and you also have to look at what happened in the summer during the judicial reform protests, when you had protest organizers stating that reservists would not show up to fight, stating that Air Force pilots, reserve pilots, would not show up to take part in attacks. And they were clearly talking about if the government was going to issue an attack on Iran, that the pilots wouldn't participate in that. And the message that those statements coming out of the organizers, what did message that send to Israel's enemies? So if the court was going to set up this commission of inquiry, well, the framing is so important. They would cut out the Oslo Accords. They would cut out the disengagement. Certainly, they would find the government being the one responsible for the protests against judicial reforms, and not the court itself, and not the opposition. And then ultimately, I think the prime minister understands that a court-based commission of inquiry already has a predetermined conclusion, which is to point all of the blame onto the prime minister, to remove blame from the military, to remove blame from the intelligence services, which should have been able to alert or prevent those attacks. So the prime minister understands that the same way that the prosecution put the prime minister on trial for corruption and cases that are falling apart, the same way that the court overrides government policies, they would seek to use this commission of inquiry as a way to get Netanyahu out of office and to force him to resign. So what Netanyahu is doing is saying, hey, I'm going to take the power away from the court. We're going to set up a governmental commission of inquiry. But he didn't say that just the coalition is going to be part of it. He said that of the members of the commission of inquiry, half of them will be picked by the coalition and the other half will be picked by the opposition. So he's proposing a balanced array of investigators into the October 7th attack, but setting the framework, setting the mandate of that commission. So we have to see how this plays out. It's going to be another standoff, but I think that it's good that the prime minister laid out the reasons very clearly why he seeks a governmental commission of inquiry and not a court-based commission of inquiry.
Yeah, we'll continue to update on where this bill goes in its further passings or attempted passings. At the same time, you have former spokesperson for Netanyahu, Eli Feldstein, alleging that the prime minister was aware and supportive of a leaked classified document aimed at swaying the Israeli public opinion regarding ongoing hostage negotiations last year. The document in question was an internal Hamas memo purporting to show that the terror group was not interested in the compromises necessary to reach a hostage deal. After it was leaked to Bild, I believe the German news outlet, Netanyahu used it to argue that only further military pressure would lead to the release of the hostages. So here you have Eli Feldstein, former spokesperson, speaking out against his former boss, the prime minister of the state of Israel.
Yeah, and Naftali Bennett and other members of the opposition stating that that this is a scandal that represents treason, that this Qatargate scandal goes all the way up to the prime minister, and basically insinuating that the prime minister is treasonous for what happened, and that the prime minister needs to resign over what happened. And what happened is apparently that there were at least two advisors that were working in the communications team, Jonathan Urich and Eli Feldstein, that at the same time, while they're either working for the Likud or for the national diplomacy director, that they are also working as consultants on the side uh, to promote Qatar. And that's real. That happened. Now the thing is, the question is whether it's a crime. The court has already dropped the charges against Orech. Have stated that there's no crime here, even though it is unseemly. And Feldstein also, it seems very unseemly that these people should be, communicating on behalf of Israel and the Israeli government, while at the same time through interlocutors taking payments to advance statements and feelings about Qatar. I mean, it's really wrong. But Qatar is not listed as an enemy state in the state of Israel, even though, as I just mentioned a few minutes ago, Israel would consider Qatar to be an enemy and not to be an ally. Um, the prime minister really trying to deny his knowledge, number one, of Feldstein and Urech's roles, and knowledge of the fact that they also were working with Qatar, also trying to distance himself from them and trying to move past this as quickly as possible. The thing that I don't really understand is what Feldstein's doing running to the press. And it just seems to me, I mean, I don't know what there's like a word for this when you just sell yourself off to the highest bidder at any time. I don't know if we could say it on a podcast, but he sold himself basically to the Qataris while working for the Israeli government. And then when this all comes out and he gets arrested and he gets then released to house arrest or whatever, that he actually goes onto the Israeli media and tries to throw the prime minister under the bus. And it's clear to me that he'll just sell out to the highest bidder, that somebody's probably paying him to go do this, and he's willing to do it at this point. So I think it's really disgusting and it's really harmful. And I think that Israel should have like a FARA, like Foreign Agent Reporting Act, the same way you have in the United States. If somebody's working on behalf of another government, that's got to be registered. That's got to be public knowledge. And in Israel, unfortunately, it's not the case. Do I think that the prime minister is involved in some kind of treason here? Absolutely not. But Feldstein and Urech have made the prime minister look really, really bad here, and have given Bennett and the opposition yet another a hook for more media attention, where they can claim that the prime minister needs to step down.
Alex, also this week in the news, Prime Minister Netanyahu announcing the development of independent arms production. Israel is working to gain as much independence as possible in its weapons production. This, according to the Prime Minister this past week, speaking at a graduation ceremony for Israeli Air Force pilots. Let's check out this video.
ובמקביל נחמש את עצמנו בצורה עצמאית. לפני כמה שבועות אני אישרתי, יחד עם שר הביטחון ושר האוצר והצוותים שנמצאים כאן, סך של 350 מיליארד שקל בעשור הקרוב, לבנות תעשיית חימוש עצמאית למדינת ישראל. אנחנו רוצים לצמצם את התלות שלנו בכל גורם, גם בידידים.
So there you have the prime minister saying that Israel will continue to purchase necessary weapons, but at the same time we'll begin to arm ourselves independently in parallel. And that's one of the key lessons we learned when President Joe Biden decided he was going to cut off weapons when Israel needed them the most, as we headed towards Rafah there in southern Gaza.
Yeah, I think this is probably the most important lesson of the war, which is that Israel has to be weapons independent, and to build as much weapons defense, missile defense as possible. You cannot be relying on the United States for THAAD and Arrow to shoot down ballistic missiles. You have to have endless ability to shoot down ballistic missiles. You have to have endless artillery. You have to have endless supplies for troops that might need to be called up to war. All these are things that Israel just did not have in place. And it's inexcusable that they didn't have it. And we saw what happens when the Biden administration, like you mentioned, said that they're going to withhold arms. When countries like Germany and France and others say that they will employ arms embargoes against Israel, Israel cannot be dependent on any country for its defense. It needs to be able to defend itself by itself, and that means including with weapons. Now, this investment is going to help Israel not only to defend itself, but it's going to help the Israeli economy in spades, because the more and more money gets invested into Israeli defense technology, it's going to be the more solutions come up, the more new products develop, the more defense exports to other countries. So I think this is going to be, have multi-billion-dollar returns for the investment that the prime minister is trying to make here.
Yeah, absolutely. Extremely important. We've learned that lesson. Unfortunately, Alex, this past Friday, 2 Israelis were murdered in a multi-pronged terrorist attack in northern Israel. It was a combined car ramming and stabbing attack carried out by an Arab terrorist who arrived from PA territory a few weeks earlier. He was illegally working here in pre-1967 Israel, carrying out this rampage in 3 locations throughout the country, stabbing, using his car as a weapon. 19-year-old Aviv Maor was murdered in the attack, along with 68-year-old Shimshon Mordechai. May God avenge their blood. Just a horrible way to go into Shabbat this week here in Israel with yet another terrorist attack. IDF chief of staff vowing that Israel will crack down, will implement stronger security protocol throughout the Central Command, basically throughout Judea and Samaria. But yet again, another deadly terrorist attack here.
And we're seeing this being the model. Somebody drives themselves into a bus stop, into a pedestrian crossing, and then they get out of their car with a knife and they just continue the rampage after the car stops moving. So this is where cars and kitchen knives turn into deadly weapons. And what happens when you incite a society to terror? Any day, somebody can wake up and decide that their car is going to be a deadly weapon, that their kitchen knife is going to be a deadly weapon, and they'll use them in terror attacks.
Yeah, just terrible, terrible going into Shabbat there. Hamas, of course, continues to violate the ceasefire in Gaza. Israel on Wednesday said there would be a response to the detonation of explosives targeting Israeli troops in Rafah. One IDF officer was wounded. Of course, there is a ceasefire for whatever it's worth, but Israel still maintaining a strong military presence, taking out remaining terrorists, terrorist infrastructure. And in this case, an IDF soldier and officer was wounded, Israel vowing to respond.
And this goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the program, the meeting between the prime minister and the president of the United States. The prime minister is going to say, hey, listen, these guys continue to violate the ceasefire day after day after day. Now you're going to reward them by leaving them in power, number one. Number two, with the investment of billions of dollars to clearing out the rubble and to start building, towers and create a free trade zone. The idea that the Palestinians, if they have better upward mobility, are going to drop their hatred of Jews, it just doesn't add up, because we see, and when you talk about the terror attack just a minute ago, we see that poverty and terrorism don't link. And sometimes the worst terrorists and the worst terrorist masterminds are those that have money. And so flooding money into the Gaza Strip, as long as Hamas is in power, as long as Hamas has the ability to continue to violate the ceasefire, and I think that this is a real difference of opinion between, let's call it the Kushner camp, like you mentioned before, and Netanyahu. But I think that there's nobody better to represent Israel's red lines, understand Israel's red lines on what needs to happen here than Netanyahu. And I do think that the president of the United States actually has a tremendous amount of respect for Netanyahu for standing up for what he believes are Israel's red lines and what Israel needs from a security perspective. So I am hopeful that, by him meeting with Rubio, by him meeting together with Trump, even if Witkoff and Kushner are in the room, that Netanyahu is not going to kowtow and bow down to, the Qataris and let them dictate, what is going to be happening in the Gaza Strip, which is essentially Israel's backyard.
Alex, looking at Lebanon now, actually Iran and Lebanon, this week it was reported that the IDF took out a senior operative in Iran's Quds force. This according to a statement by the IDF and the Shin Bet. The target was Hussein Mahmoud Marshad al-Jahari, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, a key terrorist in what is known as Unit 840, the Quds Force Operations Unit, who had been involved in recent years in advancing Iranian-directed terror plots against Israel and in the Syria-Lebanon arena. So this isn't Hezbollah per se. There's actually an Iranian Quds Force terrorist taken out by Israel in a third country there in Lebanon.
Yeah, well, I'm certainly in no position to challenge your pronunciation of the Hezbollah terrorists. But what we have seen is that Hezbollah does try to rebuild, and even that Iran is trying to affect the rebuilding of Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. I just read a report that came out from Amit Segal, Israeli journalist on Channel 12, that Iran has funneled over $1 billion into Hezbollah in Lebanon, and that the government of Lebanon says that they basically are wrapping up their efforts to demilitarize Hezbollah, but Hezbollah continues to remilitarize. And I think this is one of the issues that's going to be prime on the agenda between the meeting of Netanyahu and Trump. And it was even a few weeks ago we had some Israeli officials stating that they thought that even before a return to hostilities in Gaza, you might see a return to hostilities in southern Lebanon. So I think what you see here is that for all that Israel did to almost level most of the Gaza Strip and to destroy Hamas's capacity in Gaza, to go in and to take out Hassan Nasrallah and the entire top level of the Hezbollah leadership, to take out the mid-level of the Hezbollah leadership with that Grim Reaper episode, to take out the whole Syrian military with the fall of Bashar Assad, and then to take out the Iranian nuclear program over a course of 12 days, that none of these fronts have been completely eliminated. And there's reasons for that. I mean, when you have terrorists operating in guerrilla style, you can't get these clean surrenders. And when you have terrorists that are willing to fight to the last man, to fight to the death, if there's just one guy still standing, that's what he's going to do. And the one guy's going to recruit a second guy, and two guys are going to recruit four, and four are going to recruit eight, and eight are going to recruit 64, and just grows like that, like mushrooms, exponentially. And what you see is that the prime minister basically has to figure out, now that he's got the hostages home, now that he's gotten the reservists some rest, now that he has changed the strategic position of all of these terror proxies, how do you proceed to phase 2 in Gaza, phase 2 in Lebanon, potentially a phase 2 in Iran? What does that look like? So there's still a lot of work to get this war complete, if it's going to be possible to restart. And I think that one of the things you got to consider here is that Netanyahu is coming up on an election season. It is now the New Year's edition of this program. I think it's our 101st episode. But on the end of October of 2026, there's going to be an election. And the last thing that the prime minister wants is for the opposition, for Naftali Bennett, for others to say that Netanyahu dragged Israel into war for 2 years, in which Israel's diplomatic standing was weakened significantly. And at the end of that war, that all of those terror proxies are still standing and rebuilding. That's something Netanyahu just does not want his opposition to be able to say. And he's going to want, I believe, to get some kind of a closure, at least on the Gaza front, potentially on the Iran front, and also potentially on the Lebanon front.
Alex, let's stick on that terrorism theme if we can. The U.S. carried out military airstrikes in Nigeria, as according to President Trump, targeting ISIS operatives on Christmas Day. The terrorist group, of course, persecuting the country's Christian population. President Trump ordering strikes, he says, powerful and deadly strikes against ISIS targets in northwest Nigeria. What else do we know about this?
Well, I think that this is a good indication that Rubio and Hegseth are the ones that are guiding Trump on these policies, because this other camp of the Republican Party, the isolationist camp, certainly would not want to see the United States getting engaged in other military operations. And you see that the United States getting involved in Venezuela, that they just attacked last week in Syria, now that they're attacking in Nigeria. So the United States is back to policing the world, despite the machinations of these isolationists, the MAGA isolationists that don't want to see the United States getting involved. And I think that bodes well for Netanyahu and what he's trying to do. He can now go into the president of the United States and say, hey, listen, you're not tolerating garbage in Syria. You're not tolerating it in Nigeria. You're not tolerating it in Venezuela. And Israel's not going to tolerate it in Gaza or in Lebanon or in Iran.
Alex, following up here on a story we brought up a few weeks ago, Israel's Army Radio, the cabinet this week unanimously approved Defense Minister Israel Katz's proposal to shut down IDF-run Army Radio, the station with broadcasts set to end by March the 1st of 2026, just in several months from now, according to the minister's office, Minister Katz's office. How significant is the upcoming closure of Israel's army radio known as Galatz?
Well, the government wants to shut down Army radio because tax dollars are going to fund Army radio, and Army radio does not serve as Army radio. Army radio is essentially opposition radio. They're just they're constantly publishing, broadcasting against the government. They are in the process they're harming the morale of the military because they don't stand behind the military when the government uh, asked the military to go ahead and take out Israel's enemies. They're out there questioning the policies of the government and questioning the policies of the military. So what government's paying for that? You would think if it was government state funded army radio that it would be a mouthpiece of the government, and it's not. So the government's paying for it when they're just a leftist opposition media outlet. Let the opposition pay for its media outlets. Why should the government be paying for that? Now, what's ironic here is that the Supreme Court is arguing, and the lawyers and the attorney general are arguing that it's a threat to democracy to shut down Army radio because the Army radio is lambasting the government. And the other irony here is that in the previous government, when Bennett and Yair Lapid were in a rotation agreement as the prime minister, the Knesset passed a law to shutter the Army radio. And guess what? The court had no problem with it. The attorney general didn't have a problem with it. When the opposition said, "Okay, why should why should the government fund this thing anymore?" So the court says, "Yeah, you're totally right." But when the right wing gets into power, when Netanyahu is back into power, and they say, "Well, we want to shutter the government-funded left-wing radio station," that's when the Supreme Court and the opposition all scream bloody murder.
Alex, we have time for one more story, and this was actually like one of the top headlines on Saturday night here in Israel. And I'll be honest, I've never heard of Somaliland, but Israel became the first country to recognize Somaliland, saying that they want this nation to join the Abraham Accords, and it looks like they're very happy to do so here in the near future. The move sparks anger among regional powers who say it undermines sovereignty and the territorial integrity of the country, Somalia, which is what they broke off for. Again, I don't know too much about Somaliland, just learning right here as that was breaking news after Shabbat last night here in Israel.
Yeah, and I think we're all learning about Somaliland in Israel, but a few things that we do know. Number one is that Somaliland was this sort of like northern province of Somalia. Somalia is a war-torn country. Somaliland has been essentially governing itself as a democracy. It has tried to be independent since the early 90s, but countries do not recognize the independence of Somaliland. Israel is the first country to recognize the independence of Somaliland, demonstrating its leadership on the international stage, but it's doing so for a few key reasons. Number one is that Somaliland sits exactly opposite Yemen on the Gulf of Aden, and the Gulf of Aden is this, and the Bab el-Mandeb Straits are this choke point that leads to the Red Sea, and we know that the the Houthi pirates were patrolling these areas and not permitting for ships to go through that area, essentially putting a naval blockade, which even still to this day exists on most commercial goods that are heading to the port of Eilat, the southern port of Israel connected to the Red Sea. So Somaliland, that offers Israel, a place to park its navy, park its air force, and it's directly across the Gulf of Aden from Yemen. And Israel didn't have a real answer to deal with Yemen because Yemen is over 1,000 miles away from the state of Israel. So when Israel was flying there, they would have to fly these missions where they're flying and refueling and coming back and refueling again. So Somaliland is potentially a possibility for an Air Force base for the IDF. Right across from the Houthis in Yemen. That's number one. Number two is that Turkey has a major military presence in Somalia and in the area. So this provides a potential counterweight to Turkey in this important strategic area for Israel. The third thing is that there were talks, and the way this all came about was when Israel started to make phone calls after the Gaza war began about where could possibly serve as a landing place for displaced Gazans. And Somaliland could potentially be one of these landing places. They may very well be willing to absorb a significant number of Gazan refugees. So these are all things to look at. But meanwhile, just look at who's opposing it. You see that all kind of countries, Turkey and others, even the Saudis, opposing the Israeli recognition of sovereignty of Somaliland. And good for Israel for doing that, and good for Israel for looking out for its strategic interests first. Um, and I think Israel did display some leadership on the world stage and making a power move here. And we have to see how that develops. If was this just some kind of a meaningless announcement that will fade into the news cycle? That's possible, but it could very well be that some major announcements and strategic advantage could come out of this move.
We'll see what happens, and we're out of time, Alex. But before we let you go, let's reflect on 100 episodes. This being the 101st of Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV. It's pretty remarkable.
I think it is. It's a testament to the growth of JNS as a platform. And when we started this, there was a program with Jonathan Tobin. There was also a program with Carolyn Glick, who now works in the Prime Minister's office. Today, there's 14 different podcasts being produced weekly on JNS. We're basically coming out with 2 or 3 videos every single day, except for Shabbat, except for Saturday. And we have done this through, I think, the most difficult period, which was this war that we didn't predict, but that we were prepared for. And I credit to you for joining this partnership and stabilizing this program. And I think we've done a nice job together, bringing people the top stories of the week in a way I don't think anybody else anywhere else and any other media outlet is doing it. So, I'm proud of Jerusalem Minute, and let's say a toast to over 100 episodes.
L'chaim to that. Looking forward to the next 100 and beyond. Alex Drayman, CEO of JNS, who is going to be covering all week Prime Minister Netanyahu's trip and meetings with President Donald Trump. So you don't want to miss that on jns.org. Of course, go to JNS. Go ahead.
And I'll just add one more thing, which is that on Wednesday, on New Year's Eve, the Prime Minister is expected to address the Jewish community. This is going to be in South Florida. This is going to be a JNS-sponsored event. So we'll be able to bring you an exclusive address by the Prime Minister. And at this point, I believe over 800 people are signed up to attend live and in person. So it should be another great accomplishment for JNS.
Congrats to JNS, and make sure you go to jns.org to follow Alex's coverage of everything going on in South Florida, JNS TV, for all the amazing content JNS provides. Give us a super thanks. And also let's give a shout out to everyone on the other side of the camera here. Our producer, Zach Sickerman, you have Esther Eden, you have Aaron Wogelantern, you have Ryan Lifshitz, and station studio manager Yuri Sveretsky. Have a great week, everybody, and we will see you next week here on the 102nd edition of Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV.